The Odyssey is one of the oldest stories ever told, nearly 3,000 years old. But the entire 10-year nightmare happened because one man couldn't keep his mouth shut after winning a fight. Yeah, seriously. Odysseus had already escaped. He was safely sailing away when he turned around and shouted his real name at the monster he'd just blinded. That single moment of ego turned what should have been a 2-week voyage into 10 years of monsters, shipwrecks, angry gods, and disaster. He left Troy with 12 ships and more than 600 men. Not one of them made it home. A witch turned his crew into pigs, a 6-headed monster devoured his sailors, and even the gods themselves wanted him dead. So, how did the smartest man in ancient Greece outsmart himself for an entire decade? Let's start at the end of the Trojan War. For 10 years, the Greeks had camped outside the walls of Troy, right here on the coast of modern-day Turkey. The Trojans wouldn't come out, and the Greeks couldn't get in. Odysseus had an idea. Build a giant wooden horse, hide soldiers inside, and leave it at the gates as a gift. Are we sure this is gonna work? Trust me. Everyone loves a gift horse. What if they look inside? Who looks inside a horse? The Trojans dragged it through the gates. That night, the Greeks climbed out, opened the gates, and burned Troy to the ground. War over, Odysseus was a hero. Now all he had to do was sail home to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus on the island of Ithaca, right here. Should have taken about 2 weeks. It took 10 years. The first stop was Ismarus, right here, home of Cicones. Odysseus and his men raided the city, grabbed treasure and wine, and Odysseus told his men to get back on the ships. Did they listen? Of course not. They stayed on the beach and partied all night. The next morning, the Cicones came back with reinforcements and killed 72 of Odysseus' men, 6 from each of his 12 ships. Day 1 of the trip home, and he's already burying soldiers. After that, a storm blew them off course for 9 days. They ended up at the island of lotus eaters. Anyone who ate the lotus forgot everything. Their home, their family, their entire life. Just gone. 3 of Odysseus' scouts ate it and had to be dragged back to the ships crying. Not the worst stop on the trip. That honor goes to the next one. So, how did one cave on one island turn into the biggest mistake of Odysseus' life? They landed on the island of Cyclopes. Odysseus took 12 of his best men and explored a cave filled with cheese and lambs. His men wanted to grab the food and leave. Odysseus said no. He wanted to meet the owner. The owner turned out to be Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant and son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Polyphemus rolled a boulder over the cave entrance that was so heavy that 22 wagons couldn't move it. They were trapped. The Cyclops grabbed 2 of Odysseus' men, smashed their heads on the ground, and ate them raw. He did the same thing the next morning. 2 more men for breakfast. Odysseus couldn't kill the Cyclops because then nobody could move the boulder. So he offered the giant wine. Lots of it. Cyclops, what's your name? Polyphemus. What's yours? My name is Nobody. Nobody. Well, Nobody, I like you. I'll eat you last. That's my gift. Thanks. Very generous. After the Cyclops passed out drunk, Odysseus sharpened a massive olive stake, heated it in the fire, and drove it straight into the giant's eye. Polyphemus screamed for help. The other Cyclopes came running. Polyphemus, what's wrong? Who's hurting you? Nobody, he said. Nobody is hurting me. Well, if nobody's hurting you, go back to sleep. Brilliant, right? And in the morning, blind Polyphemus rolled back the boulder to let his sheep out and felt each one's back to make sure no men were riding them. Odysseus and his surviving men strapped themselves to the bellies of the sheep and escaped right under the Cyclops' hands. If Odysseus had just sailed away, that would have been the end of it. Poseidon would never have known. But Odysseus was too proud for that. As his ship pulled away, he stood up and shouted back at the blinded giant. Cyclops, if anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca. His men begged him to stop. He didn't care. He wanted credit. And now Polyphemus had a name. He prayed to his father Poseidon, god of the sea, to curse Odysseus. Father Poseidon, make sure Odysseus never gets home. And if he does, let him arrive late, broken, alone, and to a house full of trouble. Poseidon heard every word, and he granted every part of that prayer. From this point on, the sea itself was Odysseus' enemy. The next stop was the island of Aeolus, king of the winds. Aeolus actually liked Odysseus. He put all the dangerous winds inside a leather bag and gave Odysseus a gentle west wind to carry him straight home. For 9 days, they sailed perfectly. On the 10th day, Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Odysseus could see the smoke rising from the chimneys of his own island, and then he fell asleep. His crew had been staring at that bag for 9 days, wondering what treasure was inside. The moment Odysseus closed his eyes, they opened it. What do you think is in there? Probably gold. He's been guarding it the whole trip. Let's just take a peek. Every trapped wind exploded out at once and blew all 12 ships all the way back across the sea, within sight of home and now further away than ever. Odysseus begged Aeolus for help again. Aeolus refused. The gods clearly hate you. Get off my island. But the worst was still coming. The Laestrygonians were giants, all of them. And when the fleet sailed into their harbor, they attacked from the cliffs. They hurled boulders down onto the ships and speared the crews like fish. 11 of 12 ships destroyed. Hundreds of men killed. Only Odysseus' ship escaped because he'd parked outside the harbor. 12 ships became 1. Over 500 men became a few dozen. And they hadn't even reached the halfway point. They washed up on the island of Aea, home of the witch goddess Circe. Odysseus sent a scouting party led by his officer Eurylochus. Circe invited them in for a feast. They ate. She touched them with her wand, and every single one of them turned into pigs. Eurylochus hadn't gone inside. He ran back to the ship in a panic. She turned them into pigs! All of them? Every single one! They've got snouts and hooves and everything! Odysseus went to rescue his men alone. The god Hermes gave him a plant called moly that blocked Circe's magic. When her spell failed, she turned the men back and invited everyone to stay. They stayed for a year on the magical island, while Penelope waited at home, wondering if her husband was dead. Eventually, his men had to remind him, "Sir, are we ever going home?" "Right, home! Yes, let's do that." Circe told him he couldn't go home yet. First, he had to sail to the land of the dead and speak with the prophet Tiresias. So Odysseus sailed to the edge of the world, dug a pit, filled it with blood, and summoned the dead. Tiresias gave him one warning: do not touch the cattle of the sun god Helios, or you will lose everything. While he was down there, Odysseus saw his own mother. She had died of grief, waiting for him to come home. He tried to embrace her 3 times. She slipped through his arms like a shadow. That's what his ego had cost him. Odysseus now headed into the most dangerous stretch of water in the ancient world. First, the sirens. Beautiful voices that lured sailors to crash on the rocks. Odysseus ordered his crew to plug their ears with beeswax and tie him to the mast so he could hear the song without steering toward it. "Tie me tighter." "Sir, you told us not to untie you no matter what." "I've changed my mind. Untie me now." You also told us to ignore that." Next came Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla was a 6-headed monster on one side, Charybdis was a massive whirlpool on the other. No safe path. Odysseus chose Scylla, knowing he would lose 6 men instead of the entire ship. Scylla snatched 6 sailors and ate them alive while they screamed his name. Now came the island Tiresias had warned him about, Thrinacia, home of the sacred cattle of Helios. Odysseus told his men not to touch them, but bad winds trapped them for a month and the food ran out. While Odysseus slept, his crew slaughtered the cattle. "The gods can punish us later. We're starving now." Odysseus said not to touch them. "Odysseus is asleep, and I'd rather die by the sea than starve on this beach." When Odysseus woke up and smelled roasting beef, he knew they were finished. The hides of the dead cattle crawled on the ground. The meat on the spits mooed. Yeah, the meat mooed. The moment they sailed, Zeus split the ship in half with a thunderbolt. Every man drowned. Every single one. Only Odysseus survived by clinging to the wreckage. The sea washed him up on the island of Ogygia, right here, home of the goddess Calypso. She fell in love with him and offered him immortality if he would stay forever. Odysseus said no. He sat on the beach every day staring at the horizon and crying for 7 years. Finally, Athena convinced Zeus to intervene. He sent Hermes to tell Calypso to let Odysseus go. Zeus says to release him. Of course, when a goddess loves a mortal, the gods always interfere. Are you gonna let him go or not? Fine, but I'm not giving him a ship. Odysseus built a raft and sailed for 17 days. Poseidon spotted him and smashed it into pieces, because Poseidon wasn't done. Odysseus washed up on the island of Phaeacia, where King Alcinous heard his story and gave him a ship home. He woke up on the beach of Ithaca 20 years after he had left. So, what had been happening at home for 20 years? A disaster. 108 men from the surrounding islands had moved into Odysseus's palace, eating his food, drinking his wine, and trying to force Penelope to marry one of them. They assumed Odysseus was dead. Penelope had been holding them off with one of the greatest stalling tactics in history. She told the suitors she would choose a husband after she finished weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's father. Every day she wove, every night she unraveled her work. 3 years before a servant gave her away. The goddess Athena disguised Odysseus as an old beggar, so he could enter his own home without being recognized. As he walked through the gates, an ancient dog lying on a pile of manure lifted its head. It was Argos, the hunting dog Odysseus had raised as a puppy 20 years ago. The dog wagged its tail, laid its ears flat, and died. It had waited 20 years just to see its master one last time. Who's that old beggar? Nobody important. Then why is that dying dog wagging his tail at him? Inside the palace, the suitors mocked him, threw food at him, and treated him like garbage. One of them threw a stool at his head. Odysseus took it all, watching, counting, and planning. Penelope announced a contest. Whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads in a row would win her hand. One by one, the suitors tried. Not a single one could even bend the bow, let alone string it. The old beggar asked for a turn. The suitors laughed. Odysseus took the bow, strung it like it was nothing, and fired an arrow clean through all 12 axes. And then he turned the bow on the suitors. You thought your king was dead? You devoured his home? You harassed his wife? You plotted to kill his son? And now, pay for all of it. He and Telemachus killed all 108 suitors in the Great Hall. It was a bloodbath. But Penelope still wasn't convinced. 20 years is a long time. She had one final test. Servants, move the king's bed out of the bedroom for our guest. Move the bed? That bed can't be moved. I built it myself around a living olive tree. One of the bedposts is the tree itself, still rooted in the ground. Nobody knows that except me and you. That was the answer only the real Odysseus could give. Penelope broke down. They were finally reunited. 20 years, 2 wars, a curse from a god, 6-headed monsters, witches, and a decade of suitors. And it all ended with a man remembering how he built his own bed. The Odyssey is nearly 3,000 years old, and the whole thing comes down to the same lesson it's been teaching since the 8th century BC. The smartest person in the room can still be the dumbest person in the room if they can't control their ego. Odysseus outsmarted Cyclops, resisted the Sirens, and navigated the land of the dead. But it took him 10 years to learn the one thing he should have known all along. Sometimes the smartest move is keeping your mouth shut. If you'd rather listen than watch, whether you're cooking, driving, working, gaming, or falling asleep, we're on Spotify too. Links in the description.